everybody, and welcome to this year's Indigenous Voices panel. My name is Nora Gherbi, and I'm the founder of Who Cares Chronicles. Indigenous wisdom and environmental intelligence is at the core of the work I've been doing for more than 20 years. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the ChangeNOW team. Through our partnership, we have been able to co-create this space, which allows for Indigenous voices to be heard every year at the summit. Over the years, we've had the great opportunity to hear from Nemontenenkimo, from Indu Umaru Ibrahim, from Sean Sherman, also known as the Sioux Chef, from the great Kawawa, who was here last year on this very panel. And this year, we are honored to welcome several Indigenous representatives, including the great Chief Raoni, for the closing of the summit. I also would like to acknowledge some people in the audience, Sydney Alfonso, for her incredible work with EDKI, and Ana Rosa de Lima for her work with Melly Bees. Indigenous voices are essential at this time, and it is beautiful to see Indigenous representation even this week at the Cannes Film Festival with the premiere of the latest Martin Scorsese film, The Killers of the Flower Moon, which tells the story of the Osage people in the 1920s after oil was discovered. During what we have been calling now the Reign of Terror, the Osage people were removed by force from their native land. They suffered manipulation, fraud, and many were brutally murdered. The film got a 9-minute standing ovation. These stories are very important to me, of course, but they're also very important to ChangeNOW as a summit and to the growing number of people that are now understanding the power that lies in the voices of Indigenous members. These stories must be known, and as an Indigenous, I would like to dedicate this panel to the many Indigenous voices that have been muted and suppressed over centuries in all continents. I also would like, just like Kawawa did last year, if you haven't watched the panel from last year, I invite you to do so. It's online, it's available. So yeah, just like she did last year, the great Kawawa, and in mutual agreement with my fellow Indigenous panelists today, I would like to summon and dedicate this panel to all our ancestors, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, for we carry their voices within us today, during this panel, and every day. Thank you. And to start, we're going to have the great pleasure to have a video from Sônia, Guajajara, the Minister of Indigenous People in Brazil.
Olá, sou a Sônia Guajajara, Ministra de Estado do Ministério dos Povos Indígenas aqui no Brasil. Esse ministério recentemente criado, inédito, né? E agradeço essa ousadia do presidente Lula pela coragem de criar esse ministério. Quero cumprimentar aqui o secretário executivo do ministério, Dr. Eloy Terena, que é uma honra que Dr. Eloy esteja aí representando o governo brasileiro. Quero agradecer muito por essa oportunidade da gente estar junto, e para mim é uma honra também acompanhar este evento ChangeNOW. A mudança é agora, e para isso é muito importante que os povos indígenas sejam reconhecidos, valorizados e ter suas cosmovisões respeitadas, né? O Brasil não é o primeiro, né? Não somos o primeiro país a ter indígenas nesse lugar de representação, mas também ainda são poucos os países que apostou nessa participação indígena nos lugares de poder e decisão. Inclusive, mesmo os países mais avançados, né, mais desenvolvidos, como países europeus, ainda não conseguiram ousar com a presença indígena nesses lugares de tomada de decisão. Então, o momento é urgente, vivemos essa crise, né, da emergência climática. O mundo inteiro está sentindo já esses efeitos das mudanças climáticas. Então não há mais espaço para negacionismo, não tem mais espaço para intolerância. Já está mais que comprovado que o conhecimento tradicional dos povos indígenas contribui muito, né? Inclusive como uma das últimas alternativas para conter essa crise climática. Então, nós queremos que a Convenção 69, por exemplo, que garante o direito à consulta livre, prévia e informada, além de se considerar essa participação, essa consulta, é preciso também permitir que nós, povos indígenas, possamos participar, né, das tomadas de decisões e da construção de um novo mundo. Esse mundo onde prevalece direitos iguais, direitos de participação igualitária, né, mulheres, homens, juventude, né, um mundo que caiba a todas as pessoas. E nós, povos indígenas, estamos nos colocando à disposição para participar desse mundo. Então, eu quero muito aqui felicitar o evento por este tema, Change Now, a mudança é agora. E a partir daí, nós, povos indígenas, fazemos esse chamado, não só um chamado para quem está aí, mas um chamado mundial. Nunca mais um Brasil sem nós, nunca mais um planeta sem nós. E reafirmar o que sempre tenho dito, né, que a luta pela Mãe Terra é a mãe de todas as lutas, considerando inclusive que nós, povos indígenas, somos apenas 5% da população mundial, mas 82% da biodiversidade do planeta é protegida por nós, está dentro dos nossos territórios. Daí a importância de se reconhecer essa presença indígena, respeitar os modos de vida, respeitar as culturas e garantir os nossos direitos. E que esses direitos sejam implementados para essa mudança que o mundo precisa agora. É isso aí, gente. Um abraço.
And now it's a great honor to introduce the Executive Secretary of the Brazilian Ministry of Indigenous People, His Excellency Luiz Eloy Terena. Thank you for being here. Obrigado. Obrigado. And his wonderful translator that was here with us last year too.
Bom, muito boa tarde a todos e a todas. Meu nome é Eloy Terena. Sou atualmente o secretário executivo do Ministério dos Povos Indígenas no Brasil.
Good afternoon to all. My name is Eloy Terena, and I'm actually the Executive Secretary for the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil.
Quero falar da importância de estar aqui com vocês hoje, como já foi dito pela nossa ministra, e aproveitar esse espaço muito importante para deixar uma mensagem para vocês e compartilhar um pouco do que o Ministério tem feito esses meses.
I want to talk to you about the importance of being here today, as our minister just said, and I have a message for you, and also I will tell you a little bit of what the ministry has been doing these days.
Bom, antes eu quero falar um pouco também da minha trajetória. Eu sou do povo Terena, que é um povo que habita o bioma do Pantanal, que está localizado no estado de Mato Grosso do Sul.
I will also talk to you a little bit about my past. I'm from the people Terena, a people from the biome of Pantanal that's situated at Mato Grosso do Sul.
E eu costumo dizer que faço parte de uma geração de jovens indígenas que nos últimos 20 anos no Brasil tiveram acesso a políticas de ações afirmativas e fizeram esse trajeto da aldeia para a universidade.
And I also want to say, I always say that I belong to this indigenous youth that had access to affirmative policies that allow them to go to university and to make the path from their villages.
Então, há 20 anos atrás, quando nós estávamos no primeiro ano do primeiro governo Lula, eu estava saindo da minha aldeia e indo para a universidade.
So 20 years ago, at the first year of Lula's government, I was leaving my village and going to university.
E hoje, 20 anos depois, eu estou tendo a oportunidade de, já formado profissionalmente, de estar contribuindo na construção de uma nova política indigenista no Brasil.
And today, 20 years later, with my formation accomplished, I have the occasion to help to contribute to the creation of a new indigenous policy in Brazil?
Acho que a primeira coisa que nós temos que dizer é que a demarcação das terras indígenas no Brasil voltou.
The first thing we have to say is that the demarcation of indigenous lands in Brazil is back.
Após mais de 6 anos sem nenhuma terra demarcada e várias terras desprotegidas, nós estamos retomando novamente essa política de proteção.
So after over 6 years of no lands being demarcated and many lands without protection, we are now coming back with this politics of demarcation of indigenous lands.
Eu acredito que a mensagem que vocês estão trazendo aqui, de que a mudança ela é urgente, isso já vem sendo sentido nos territórios indígenas há muito tempo.
This message that we have today here, that the change is urgent, we have known this in the indigenous territories for a long time.
Seja pela ação do garimpo ilegal,
By the action of illegal mining,
seja pela perseguição e criminalização de lideranças indígenas,
persecution and criminalization of indigenous leaderships,
invasão dos territórios indígenas por madeireiros e soja,
invasion of indigenous lands by land workers and also soja fields.
Então, nesse exato momento, nós estamos trabalhando muito para avançar na demarcação dos territórios e fazer a desintrusão desses territórios que estão muito invadidos.
So, in this moment, we are really working to advance in the demarcation of indigenous lands that have not been demarcated yet, and also to make the disintrusion of indigenous lands that have been occupied.
Quando nós assumimos lá no Brasil, nós encontramos, por exemplo, a situação da terra indígena Yanomami.
When we assumed in Brazil, we were faced with the situation of Yanomami people's lands,
Onde nós temos um território que estava invadido por aproximadamente 30 mil garimpeiros.
We have one territory that was invaded by approximately 30,000 gold miners.
E foi preciso uma verdadeira operação de guerra para começar a retirar todas essas pessoas que estavam dentro desse território.
And a real war strategy was necessary to start taking these people out of this territory.
Esse tem sido um dos principais trabalhos que o Ministério dos Povos Indígenas já tem desenvolvido lá no Brasil.
This is one of the main works that the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil is doing right now.
Mas para a gente pensar nas mudanças efetivas para os povos indígenas, eu gostaria de ressaltar 3 pontos principais que a ministra, de certa forma, já abordou.
So, to talk about the change in indigenous lands and indigenous rights, I would like to point 3 main points that the minister somehow has already mentioned.
Primeiro é reconhecer o protagonismo que os povos indígenas têm que ter nesse processo de enfrentamento à crise climática.
First of all, is to recognize the main role that indigenous peoples must have in this process of climate change.
Já foi dito pela ministra Sônia que nós, povos indígenas, somos 5% da população mundial e os nossos territórios protegem mais de 80% da biodiversidade.
As the minister Sônia just said, we indigenous people, we are 5% of world's population, but we protect over 80% of the biodiversity.
Então é preciso tirar a demarcação das terras indígenas dessa posição de antagonismo ao dito desenvolvimento.
So we have to stop saying that the demarcation of indigenous lands is antagonist to development.
Não existe antagonismo.
There is no antagonism.
O que nós podemos fazer é promover também, dentro dos territórios indígenas, o etnodesenvolvimento a partir da cosmovisão dos povos indígenas.
What we can do is promote within the indigenous territories the development and ethno-development that's also in harmony with the cosmovision of these indigenous peoples.
O outro segundo recado que eu quero deixar
The second message I want to give you
é o respeito aos direitos dos povos indígenas.
is the respect to indigenous people's rights.
E aqui nós estamos falando da Convenção 169 da Organização Internacional do Trabalho.
And here we're talking about the Convention 169 of World Work Organization.
Essa importante convenção, ela prevê o direito à consulta e consentimento prévio, livre e informado dos povos indígenas.
This very important convention, it says that indigenous people must be consulted and must agree to change before they take place.
E esse dever não é apenas dos estados, governos, é também um dever das empresas.
And this duty, it's not only a duty of the government, but also of the industry.
E esse direito, ele não se resume apenas a uma simples participação dos povos indígenas.
And this right doesn't mean that indigenous people must only participate.
O direito à consulta, ele decorre do princípio da autodeterminação dos povos indígenas.
It's a consultation right, and this comes from the principle of self-determination of indigenous people.
Ou seja, é você reconhecer que somos povos autônomos,
So this means that you recognize that we are autonomous people.
temos a nossa própria organização, cultura e língua,
We have our own organization, language, and culture,
e que os nossos conhecimentos têm que ser levados em consideração.
and our knowledge must be taken into consideration.
O terceiro recado é a responsabilidade das empresas em relação aos direitos indígenas.
The third message is the responsibility of this industry towards indigenous rights.
Não é possível mais ficar ignorando o princípio da devida diligência.
It's not possible to ignore the principle of devida diligência. Sorry, I don't know how to translate this.
Due diligence, né? Devida diligência. E
What does it mean, devida diligência? What does this principle mean? O que esse princípio quer dizer?
agora que eu vou explicar.
You explain.
Muitas empresas, né, elas adquirem matérias-primas que estão causando violações a direitos humanos nos territórios indígenas.
Many industries, they get their material, their primary material, in a way that's violating indigenous people's rights within their territories.
Por exemplo, o ouro extraído ilegalmente da Amazônia vem para a Europa.
For example, gold that has been legally extracted from Amazon is coming to Europe.
A soja, a carne, todas também são produzidas em cima de territórios indígenas.
Soya, meats, they're all produced inside the indigenous territories.
Então é preciso também que as empresas cobrem essa responsabilidade em toda a cadeia de produção.
So these industries also have to ask for this responsibility within the entire chain, production chain.
E por fim, eu quero aproveitar esse momento aqui com vocês
And finally, I want to take this moment with you
e denunciar ataque que nós, povos indígenas, estamos sofrendo neste momento no Brasil.
to denounce an attack that we indigenous people are suffering right now in this right moment in Brazil.
Nesses primeiros 4 meses de governo, nós avançamos muito na demarcação e na proteção dos territórios.
During these first 4 months of Lula's government, we have advanced a lot in the demarcation of these territories and their protection.
Isso foi compromisso assumido pelo presidente Lula e está sendo concretizado por meio do Ministério dos Povos Indígenas.
This engagement was taken by President Lula and it's been put in place by the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples.
No entanto, nesta semana, o parlamento brasileiro aprovou, né, uma medida que visa retirar a competência para demarcar do nosso ministério.
However, this week, the Brazilian Parliament has approved a law that is going to take the responsibility of these demarcations out of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil's hands.
Ou seja, é um verdadeiro ataque da bancada ruralista ao Ministério dos Povos Indígenas, que foi criado justamente para fazer a proteção dos territórios.
So this is a real attack of the ruralist, the agriculture lobby in Brazil, which we call Bancada Ruralista, that is taking power out of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples.
Então nós estamos sim vivenciando o governo do presidente Lula, mas com um parlamento extremamente ainda conservador.
So we do have the government of President Lula, but without an extremely conservative parliament.
Então, este é um espaço importante também para fazer essa denúncia, e nós queremos que vocês continuem olhando para a situação dos povos indígenas no Brasil.
So this is a very important space to denounce this, and we ask you to keep looking for the situation of indigenous people's rights in Brazil.
Nós queremos continuar contando com vocês. Muito obrigado.
We want to keep having your support. Thank you.
Agora nós saímos.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a surprise for you guys. Surprise for me too. We're going to welcome in about a few seconds a group of musicians that are part of the Association Jiboyana. Jiboyana was created in 2020, and they work very closely with indigenous people. And their approach is very holistic. Their program also is very holistic, working with reforestation, humanitarian and political and ecological work is at the core of their day-to-day. They also are trying to bring clean water to more... Can you just wait 1 second? Yeah. They're trying to bring clean water to more than 600 indigenous groups. And through their work, they've also been able to participate to several events, such as the COP26. They've also worked with UNESCO, the European Parliament, and they will be, in October 2023, the indigenous representative of Jiboyana will be organizing a series of events. So please stay in touch with them and follow their work and support it as well. Now the floor is yours.
Hello, so we are Association Jiboyana, and just to say, we ask permission to sing this song. Thank you.
Sina baixo, sina baixo.
So much. Thank you so much for this musical interlude. And again, it's called Jiboyana. So if you want to follow it, support it, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm going to let the wonderful, and I'd like to actually take this moment to thank, and actually applaud the work of the tech team. Please join me, because they work so diligently. They make magic happen for us. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so we're going to continue this panel on Indigenous voices, and I'm very, very happy and very excited to welcome with me on stage Nonette Royo from the Tenure facility and Jennings, Health in Harmony. You guys can come closer, because it's just going to be the three of us. And we're going to have the best conversation, because it's my favorite topic. Nonette, I'm so happy that you're here, and I followed your lead on summoning our grandmothers and grandfathers and our ancestors to do this panel. It always makes it easier. So maybe you can start by introducing yourself to the whole audience that's here today.
Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. And whoever's watching in your time zone, good day. I am Nonette Royo. I am the Executive Director of the Tenure Facility, an organization that helps get land rights to Indigenous peoples and local communities in tropical rainforests of the world, especially in tropical Asia, the Congo Basin, and the Amazon Basin. And Indigenous peoples and local communities, when they get their land rights, are able to protect forests, their homes, and therefore protect nature and forests for us. That's where I come from, yes.
And also, I'd like for you, Jennings, from Health in Harmony, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nora. And I just want to express my deep gratitude to everyone who's involved with this panel. It's very humbling for me to be up here with you. Nonette has been a friend, a mentor, and advisor to our founder, Dr. Kennery Webb, and to me for many years. And it's just an extraordinary pleasure and humbling for me to be here. Health in Harmony is a 15-year-old planetary health organization founded on the understanding that we have never lived in a world where the health of people, the health of ecosystems, and the health of the planet could be addressed in silos. Our mission is to reverse the loss of tropical rainforests on planet Earth in order to curb global heating and the climate crisis. And when it comes to knowing how best to guard and steward Earth's tropical rainforests, I'm not the expert. My colleagues aren't the experts. The experts are the people who live in these forests, the indigenous peoples, the traditional peoples, and the local rainforest communities, the people of the place. So we enter these rainforest communities, and we conduct a methodology called radical listening, which I can talk about in a few minutes, but it's an anti-colonial approach. It does more than just seek free, prior, informed consent. We seek to be guided precisely by the wisdom of indigenous, traditional, and local communities.
Thank you, Jonathan. While we were preparing, which is something that I like to mention in the panels that I get to organize, is that there's a lot of preparation and a lot of talks that happened before. And Nonette, you and I, we spoke of very many different aspects of your work. One of them is reparation. Can I use that word?
Yes.
And so within that scope, the Tenure facility has established a wide program. Can you just tell us more about how it's articulated in the region that you work?
Yeah, what is really important for us to remember is that the world's tropical rainforest right now, 1/3 of it is intact, 1/3 of it is highly degraded, and 1/3 of it's lost. And when we talk about climate change, the trees that we're talking about that will help us through climate change are the standing trees, the standing forests that we have right now, and the guardians of those 1/3 are the indigenous peoples and local communities. And they have been doing this for hundreds of years. And when you talk about this reparation. It's actually a recognition of what they have already done and are currently delivering at the risk of their own lives and their cultures and their families. And this is where the Tenure facility is helping. We are proactively providing the funding and technical assistance to assist in expanding the mapping and delineation and demarcation, as what the Minister Eloy was saying, of these territories, so that the governments who said they are recognizing these rights can deliver the action that's needed for it. Because there's been a lot of words saying we recognize in the international instruments, in the commitments to climate change, commitments to biodiversity, but the action is very, very little. So the reparation we're talking about here is the grants, the funding, that's channeling directly to them, to indigenous peoples and local communities, is what we are doing. So we translate that to grants and technical assistance, and they are not small. They are not just $3,000, $50,000. It's actually large, and it's large because they have done so much, and they're only getting very little. So it's $1 million a year for every organization. We're committing to longer term for them, 5 years to 10 years. And that's for the tropical rainforest, indigenous peoples, and local communities that are still in active guardianship and stewardship of the forests.
And like you said, reparation and recognition are fundamental tools and necessary to benefit all of us in the process.
Yes.
And I like to really focus on the words that we use when we try to express ourselves, and especially since the panel, we've titled it Indigenous Voices, so reparation, recognition. And then there's something you work with, you're fundamentally working with, radical listening. Maybe you can tell us what it is in the scope of your work. And I also think that for our audience, it's really interesting to put it into context, because radical listening can be applied to so many other sectors of our lives and our society. But please, Jonathan.
Thank you. Let me start by saying it's radical for a few reasons. Number one, because the societies that I come from haven't typically listened. Number two, when we listen, we are committed to investing precisely in the intersectional systems-oriented solutions that rainforest communities themselves design. Again, they are the experts. They know best what they require to protect and expand our tropical rainforests. The radical listening exercise starts with a very simple question. And I would like for you to hear the anti-colonial mindset in this question, and I would like for you to appreciate something of the ethos of reciprocity in this question. The radical listening exercise starts by saying, you are the guardians of a massive rainforest that is so valuable to the health of this planet and to the health of any Homo sapien, any person, and any species that lives on this planet. How might the world community assist you to guard your rainforests as a thank you for guarding this rainforest? It's so essential for us to understand that the health of a rainforest half a world away impacts my health, my family's health, whether I live in Paris, Geneva, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Tokyo, etc. And so radical listening, again, we are committed to being guided by and investing precisely in their wisdom. No preconceived notions, no judgment, no kit of solutions that we arrive with, no idea of the problems that we perceive, but listening and then following their guidance and transferring wealth, transferring resources back into these communities whom we so desperately need, and by we I mean humanity, we so desperately need to be leading us out of this climate crisis and out of the biodiversity crisis.
And I'd like to emphasize again that this panel, like other panels that we co-create with Change Now, with Who Cares, we have one on human rights where we also have Indigenous voices speak on their rights. But these panels are panels that we'd like to have every year, because we feel, obviously we feel very strongly the underrepresentation of Indigenous voices. And why they matter is because we're in danger of losing so much knowledge and so much wisdom that can actually accelerate the turnaround that we need to have for our planet. And by the work that you do, you're trying to extract and preserve, extract in the right sense of the term, not the one that we use usually with the planet. We're trying to create and get back to the knowledge that we are in the danger of losing. As an example, a lot of the languages that are making the cloth of indigenous people in all continents, I myself am trying to learn the indigenous language of my grandmother, and it's such a process because obviously it's a new thing, but you are doing so much, and maybe you can just tell us more about this, and maybe Nonette, can you complement that, about this body of ways of being that we need to apply to nature today, that we have available, we're just not listening. Or we're not, but you are.
Well, I'm learning how to, and doing as much as we can. So I am formerly an ecologist, and what I'm about to say may be somewhat provocative. I hope not. I mean, no disrespect by it, and I certainly don't want to generalize and dehumanize indigenous peoples. But my sense is that there is a subset of our Homo sapien species who have not developed a conceit to see us as existing apart from nature, but to understand that we are of nature. We are because of nature. We are one species in the animal kingdom. We are one species on the ecosystems that we inhabit. And our very existence and our well-being depends on the integrity of these ecosystems. And by and large, when you look at indigenous cultures, traditional peoples, indigenous peoples, they haven't developed this conceit to see themselves as apart from nature. So not only do we need to listen to them and understand how to protect these biodiverse and climate-critical tropical rainforest ecosystems, but I would also submit to you that as humans, we need to adopt something of their ethos when it comes to life in general and obviously ecosystems worldwide.
Nonette, I'd like to ask you this question. When we prepared for this panel, again, I mentioned something that I've mentioned earlier, which is the concept and the workshop that we provide, which is the concept of environmental intelligence. And I insist because there's a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence, but I think the fundamental, the one that we should really be focusing on is environmental intelligence, which is what indigenous people have mastered over millennia, and that we in Western communities and developed world, we are in the danger, we're losing every single minute, every time we go about our days, and every time there's the introduction of a new technology that's super sexy and super attractive, and social media and this, there's so many things moving at the speed of light, and the opposite is the speed of life, which is the intelligence of nature. So I think environmental intelligence is what we try to teach, is to, I'm not saying we shouldn't have phones and cars and all that stuff. The concept of environmental intelligence is to marry indigenous wisdom from millennia and to create technology from the prism of indigenous wisdom and not have it completely forgotten in the shuffle. Is there something within your work that you could share with us, and I know there is, that is an example of environmental intelligence that you would like to share with our audience? Something that you've observed, that you know as an indigenous person that you'd like to share with us so that they can take it with them and start applying it in daily lives?
There are two things that I experienced growing up. And this has been well written also in a book of Tyson Yunka Porta called Sand Talk. He's an Aborigine writer that is very prominent, and that is the mind and the heart connection enhanced by something else. and that is the spirit. And the spirit is very, very alive in indigenous peoples and local communities, indigenous peoples. And you will know this when you join ritual and welcoming and thanking. And this morning, the welcoming of the ancestors. The intelligence of nature, how long did we exist? 3.8 billion years, is ingrained in the practices passed from generation to generation by indigenous peoples. Now, we touch our hearts and right now remember, why is it that we love being with nature? At some point when in our ancestors' lives, we were all taught by nature. So this intelligence is very present in the communities we work with right now. And what it is observing patterns where hands connect with hearts and mind and spirit. And this teaches in ways that are not fast, but long-term, yes. So the current AI, as we experience it, disconnects us. And this is something of an awareness that we all know now. The connection and the integrity of indigenous peoples in nature is what I think is what holds them together despite the challenges in the territories. Traditional knowledge holds them together. And that traditional knowledge is in observing patterns, looking at how water, when it comes through, is going to be accessed when it's in dry season, and to avoid the dangers of being flooded when it's rainy season. So just practical knowledge like that. The respect of spirit, the taking only of what you need and not taking too much and leaving something for the next generation. And then the neighbors, the practical things, don't take too much because we're harvesting from nature. Neighbors need it. Tomorrow we need it. We don't want to destroy. That's just an example.
Thank you, Nonette. And maybe you can share one that you've observed that's useful for your day-to-day in Seattle.
I try, this is very personal.
And sorry, you are in Seattle, right?
Well, I'm in the Columbia River Gorge, just outside of Portland, Oregon.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. With my children, I am doing my best to introduce them to indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And that is not easy for me to do because I don't know how to do it without appearing I sometimes don't know how to do it without appearing disrespectful or appropriating. And I'm trying to find something in my ecological understanding that bridges that, I don't know if it's cultural or intellectual, I'm not sure. But at Health and Harmony's work alongside rainforest communities in Brazil, Madagascar, in the Congo Basin, in Indonesia, a lot of us in this room are thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, carbon, biodiversity. The proof of concept that we published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences is a Western scientific demonstration of the bounty of return on investment that these communities can give back to you and the planet. I won't go into the details, but when you invest in indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom, you render the UN Sustainable Development Goals, those siloed goals, somewhat obsolete, if I might say, because the return on investment in their wisdom is across all aspects of life.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm just really inspired about the word wisdom all the time, and I think I'd like to also emphasize on one thing. It's not, we want to feel when we express what Indigenous voices should be, is that they should be included in all discussions. And what we've observed over the years is that when there's a project within a certain community and it's being decided by everyone but the indigenous people, that's where those projects go wrong. That's where they are not sustainable. I mean, I don't love the word sustainable. I really like to use the word regenerative. But it is fundamental to get everyone at the table. And Nonette and you, how on your day-to-day work are you managing to get some space for these voices to be heard?
Yes, thank you. That's the core of the work we do. We know that indigenous peoples live in remote areas and they are invisible, right? So it is hard to come forward and represent them if you don't have, in any of the members of the community, don't have something to show that they are the occupants of that particular territory. So they have, for years we have done this work with government, invest in making sure the evidence of their existence and management of the territories are very much palpable and it's in their hands. The map of their territory, and when they have the map of their territory and their governments recognize this is in accordance with law, as they had said they have a law to recognize, like especially in Brazil, then they can be at the table making decisions for what could happen and will be allowed and will not be allowed in the land. Mm-hmm. So that's the power of being at the table, right? Influencing. Now, if that doesn't happen and if they have been ignored, they go to court. And the reason for going to court is here. It says this. Now, there is something that we need to understand in owning collective land. The indigenous peoples, in their values, belong to the land. We belong to the land. We cannot own something that outlives us. Nobody owns nature. We are part of nature. And when we have this title, it is because the language of the law, the language that protects, is the language of ownership, right? If I don't have a paper for my house and my land, I can't go to court and say, hey, you cannot grab that, you Mr. X coming to my house, grabbing my land. No, I cannot, you cannot go. I have here an evidence. They have to use the same language we use. Indigenous peoples to say, this we own. Do not do anything here. Come talk to us. We will tell you where you can and where you cannot. It's sacred in some of these places.
Absolutely.
It's so important. And that's why we do the work we do, because we need to talk. And if we talk real terms. We talk rights. We talk, can you, can't you? What is consent? What is FPIC? We talk everywhere here. We talk FPIC, consent, free and prior informed consent. What is that if we don't have evidence of what it is, where we occupy, where we take our soy of food, where we protect our forests, where it's sacred? It's in the map. Now, we do not actually want to say we own this thing. We are owned by it. But we are forced to make this statement to be able to inform others and to have a peaceful conversation about what can we and can't we do as human beings addressing our needs in this planet.
Thank you, Nonette. Thank you so much for this. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to welcome another person on stage, but I would like to really thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you to be here today. And you just combined everything that we need, which is knowledge and listening. And I hope that you'll take those two words to create the reparation that we need. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you later. I'm going to welcome now on stage one more speaker with me. I hope she's here. Just give me 1 second. Yes, please. I'd like to welcome now on stage Zaya, who is an Indigenous activist and a model. You can sit right here. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here with presence and intention and love, and to know a little bit more about us and what we provide for this world that is very important. And thank you, Nora, for receiving me here. I'm very happy and grateful.
Very happy that you're sharing stage with me. So Zaya, maybe you can tell us about the work that you do. And while we were preparing, we had a lot of discussion about ancestry as well.
Yeah.
And how we are, it's true that the indigenous groups are guardians of the earth, but they're also the wisdom keepers.
Yes.
And that wisdom, you know, we're talking a lot about transgenerational knowledge. We know now on a biomolecular level that it's true, that it happens. So I guess it's the same for wisdom. There are some things that you are doing and that you are sharing that are definitely coming from past generations.
Yes. Everything that I'm doing and being and going in my journey, it's surrounded by the representation that I want to see in the world. We are the true guardians and owners of different lands in the world, but also we are not just in the forest. We need to be also in the inclusion, decision makers in the world. And when I passed for so much different violence in my life, living in the forest with my family, I always had the dream also to go to a city and maybe represent my people in the way that I want, pass them their message, but in also my way and the way that they believe that we should share with this world. And when I went to a big city, my first time was my 15, and I discovered that the fashion industry didn't have any inclusion of indigenous people working that, as another many different industries. And I was asking myself, why? I know that Black people also today has a huge community and voice in the world, but I believe that indigenous people can also have, you know, and not suffer so much racism and discrimination. So then I started to fight for inclusion in Brazil, what was very hard and difficult because even in Brazil has this stardom of the colonial side. The stardom where everything has this state of mind where it's not in the way that is permitted, you know, allowed to have more new voice, or people that is there in presence with their own body, you know. And I try to question everyone, why has not indigenous people here? And people actually, because I was fighting and asking, they are saying no to me. No, you're not gonna be in this campaign. No, you're not gonna do that. You're not gonna do castings. Was a kind of a truly nightmare. But I keep fighting because it was something that I believe that we had to have more opportunity. In the sense that, for example, if today, yesterday we had a horrible message, horrible news in Brazil through this new government. You can imagine if has more indigenous people work inside the government, could be a different reality where we had our own place and voice and fight to be standing for, but also fight for the new generation and our elders, where we have the opportunity to be there talking about it and be there voting and fighting for. What I know Eloy before explained here, and Sônia Guajajara, they are fighting against this Congress and the politicians where they want to grow the economy, not thinking about who is living there in that territory or community. They want to take the resources at any cost to give here to the international countries
but not thinking who is living there or suffer with that genocide.
And it's interesting that you bring this up, because it's one thing to have your voice heard. It's another for people to listen to you and apply the knowledge that you're sharing, or the direction, the hopeful direction that you're giving. And within your work, this is something you're trying to do, and with the work of the people that we've seen in this panel. But as a young activist, do you feel that the work that you're doing is being, and again, excuse for the word that I'm going to use, but easier now that there has been a little bit more, I would say, voices being heard? And like I said, it's one thing to be heard, it's another for people to apply the knowledge that you're sharing.
Yeah.
Do you feel that at the moment? And is fashion, because one of your medium is fashion.
Yeah. I don't feel easy at all. I think it's getting harder and harder every single day, because fashion industry is the second hugest pollution that produce pollution in the planet. Also waste. And when I work with a client, I make sure that he understands that he can put in his company ways to be recycling, you know, and ways to be sustainable, doing new regenerative materials or products, or bringing to people a solution that if you wear a clothes for 5 years from this brand, you can come back to the brand with the same clothes, and they're gonna renew these clothes and resell again. And this is one of the solutions that is sustainable, that I believe that it's not about just being a campaign on a face a campaign. I also fight for the future of this planet, and how we can re-educate the new system and this youth, you know. So I also bring this way of that I know that many brands also, we need to give the chance them to change, because I know that it's not easy. All the time is a judgment side of different magazines and social medias on the brands saying that they are not changing, they are doing bad, they are doing photo print of animals and these things, but also we need to give time. For now, they're changing. For what people are trying to elaborate and collaborate to do a new step forward where we're gonna be in a sustainable future, because it's the only solution for us. You know, we cannot come back. We are arriving in those days where we took so much resources from the planet, so much resources from nature, and we need to give a break to her recover herself, you know, in regenerative way. So it's not easy, but I keep doing, you know, it's...
You're strong. One of the topic in fashion as well is cultural appropriation of patterns. And we talked about this, you and I, and it's true. Like, I mean, I know a pattern that's beautiful for a designer that sees it and is like, oh, I want to use this for my creative work. But it is fundamental that they recognize and they authorize, you know, they get the authorization through the people, through the culture that has created this pattern. And sometimes it can be a sacred pattern or a pattern that has a message. There's a lot of mythology and a lot of symbolism in some of the patterns, and they mean something. They actually have their form of language. And you using it, it feels, I mean, a brand using it without putting it into a context feels tone deaf. How do you work with that?
You know, for me, I always, since that I was kid, I have seen so many different ways of proper appropriation, cultural appropriation happening in different industries. But when I'm arriving in the big city that I fight against the fashion, telling them to change, they actually they did in another way around, where they create girls inside the stardom, where they say, oh, you have an ancestrality with indigenous people because you look like. And then they told these girls to basically interact with Indigenous to the girls that start to say that they are Indigenous, where actually they are not. And this was the first biggest cultural appropriation where I saw myself in a place where they want someone to be in silence, work with this industry, and doing a representation that is not real. But also, we need, inside this system, we need to include Indigenous people and Black people inside of the board, inside of the system. People that are in the decisions behind, not just who is being exposed outside.
Yeah.
And it has cultural appropriation with many brands that use prints of our craftsmanship and different things that don't belong to them, and they just saw, oh, it's beautiful, let me use that in my brand because it's gonna be nice. But actually it's not. Who they are inspiring with that. And we need to ask ourselves. And also, I think a lot of people need to adopt to themselves a way of just doing your personality. And also, one of the things in our culture that we are so connected with nature, that is what I tell to people from here, from the White Society. Nature is a way to you connect with yourself. But here as create this concept of nature, but people don't really know what it is until you see with their own eyes, you know, or feel with the experience. So I think also when people connect with themselves, they start to understand that if this don't belong to me, I'm not gonna do it. Or if it's right, okay, I'm gonna do what is right. If this is wrong, I'm not gonna go for it because it's wrong. You start to respect another cultures. You start to respect the way that people believe, the way that people have their life. And here, when I arrived the first time last year in Europe, I didn't speak any English, and I was so judged just by the fact that, you know, as an Indigenous woman, you arrive in the country that is developed, and you just expect people to be humble and receive you with this harmony way, this positive way, that I'm also here to fight for something that is much more big, is a cause. And was not that way. And I adapt myself to be inside of this code just to represent them, but also to understand what is necessary today to fight for here too. Because I think everyone here can learn so much more through the ecological knowledge that we have, and also combine this with technology. And I know that people, it's amazing this conference, and I know that a lot of people is also giving a lot of importance to technology. It's one part, it's very important, but also how are you guys gonna go forward in the planet if it's just technology and has no nature? For example, in the Amazon, people don't really know what's going on there, the war inside of the trees. People just see from the satellites, the drones. And this is so sad because it's so much more things happening there. And I think it's, sorry, I'm prolonged too much. I'm going to say too much things.
But when we were preparing, you and I started this panel for those of you that were here at the beginning. Thank you. Last year, when we spoke, we had the great Kawawa, who came from Brazil, who is an incredible woman. And when she started the panel, she summoned ancestry into the panel. And you and I, when we were preparing, we talked a lot about your grandmother as well.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe you could share something that you've learned.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I think for Indigenous people, I mean, you're much younger than me, but for us to continue to carry the voices of our ancestry, we need to continuously be connected to them through the spirit,
Yes.
and also through everything that we can retain from what we were exposed to. And some of it comes naturally, but you spoke so highly of her and so beautifully of her. Maybe you can share something that was the fundamental thing that helps you in your activism.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me where my inspiration comes from, and comes from my grandmother and my mother. The community which I grew up, doesn't exist today. People know about it because there was a huge genocide that happened in the Amazon where the deforestation 20 years ago was happening and was in a very rude way, where the indigenous people didn't have any voice to fight for the land and our spiritual connection that we have with the land. And I was raised in the way that I was run away with my grandmother because she was suffering persecution together with my mom. Because my grandmother, she always fight for life. And she fight against to the loggers, to the farmers. She took like huge knife. And she was like, if you come here in my territory, you're gonna pay for it. And they arrived, they went for war that to really invade the land. But I think when she thought that they are really doing that, she was like, I need to save my family. I need to run. It's not my choice, but I need to do it. And then she took me, I was a kid, I was 4 or 5 years old. And my mom, that was a teenager, went have me, and we run. But I saw, at that moment, I actually, when I was born, my mom already felt that I had an important message. But when I was run away, I felt much more that my place here gonna be recognized. And I want her to be recognized. I know the different ethnicities in the world to be recognized. Different territories where we can share the resources, but we don't want to be taken from us. Because we are the guardians when we take care of the whole nature. It's not just for us, it's for the whole humanity. And she inspired me in the biggest way where I need to fight for my life and others. The way that she did was too much machist weight surround her.
Yes.
And she was just trying to carry this very strong feminine message of the modern nature. And her connection was extremely strong with the land. I saw her, I know that is very, very hard to say that even for me, like, when we were running, I saw her like putting herself on the floor and crying for the land as is the part of her own body. And this is the connection that the elders has with the land. Because when they take the plants, the magical side, to connect with another dimensions, they connect straight with the land because it's what makes them to reconnect with another cultural way of future and past. And then I had that, seeing her, and I was like, oh my God, I'm her generation. I'm from the same blood, I'm same lineage.
Yes.
I need to use the intelligence. I need to use my knowledge to connect with people and spread message to the world, to save our culture, to save the way that we are in balance with nature. And this was the huge inspiration that I had in life.
Your grandmother's name?
Is Joanna.
So in closing of this panel, I'd like to dedicate this panel to our grandmother's ancestor, Joanna, and my grandma, Coco. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sister.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And before we leave, when you summon the ancestor, you always have to thank them before you close. So I'd like for everyone here to thank the ancestor that have joined us invisibly into this panel.
Also, just one single thing. The colonial side is still very strong in this planet. The colonial culture. But you guys, with your evolution, can change everything, can change this future. Your generation can change. So I just want you guys to think about your children, about how you want them to live for so longer in this planet. So this is what you guys gonna touch yourself and fight for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.